Hi, my name's Tara Hounsley, Director of Communications at UKFT. I'm here today with Keric Morris, Executive Partner for Enterprise Strategy and the Global Energy and Sustainability Lead at IBM Global Business Services, as part of British Textile Week, to just discuss a project we've been working on together called Sustainable Supply Chain Optimisation, or SSCO. The SSCO project is a research and innovation initiative jointly funded by the UK government through UK Research and Innovation and Innovate UK. And the project partners are UKFT, Tech Data, the Future Fashion Factory and IBM. So this is a 9-month pilot project which started in April 2021, aiming to improve visibility and transparency throughout the fashion supply chain. The pilot organisations working with the project were Next, New Look, Laxtons, N and H&M, the COS brand. So Keric, can you give us a bit of an overview of the project and how IBM got to be involved?
Sure. So, IBM got to be involved over a very long period of time. What we've been working sort of within this space, looking at transparency, looking at sort of sustainability from a supply chain perspective for a while. Actually, sort of starting off more in foodstuffs than in fashion, and actually the start of all of this was really around sort of making sure that sort of product recalls could be done effectively and understanding sort of where the traceability was from that sort of perspective. But we were then sort of having conversations 2 years ago around, well, actually, how do you apply that to fashion? And that was with a variety of different organizations within the fashion industry. And I think that the general feel was that, while there were lots of very sort of good components which were sort of being built out within the industry, that there wasn't sort of a ubiquitous kind of play, which was looking at the technology side more than anything else. And so, what we did was working with those organizations is actually sort of go and have a chat with the government around actually sort of how do we sort of take this forward? How do we actually sort of kind of build those technical capabilities out? And then that's sort of how we went through the funding process to then set the project up. Now, what the project actually is really all about is kind of changing the traceability piece from being a product backwards to a fiber forwards. So what we're doing is you're still using elements of product back to actually understand the tiers of organizations that are involved. But what we're then doing is we're then sort of taking data in directly sort of from the suppliers. And what we're doing is we're taking production data. And then what we then do with that data is that then is aggregated. And then when an invoice is then created, it effectively connects all the dots back up, backwards all the way through the supply chain. Now, we've been working with a variety of different organizations, all the ones that Tara, you just mentioned, but also, we've been talking with BCI, with HIG, with Textile Exchange, Textile Genesis, to also sort of look at how not only does this just kind of give you a kind of a golden thread of transparency, but how might you then layer in additional data? How can you connect that data so that, for BCI, for example, you can connect all the way back to the farm? And making sure that what we're creating is a kind of a truly holistic process. Now the idea with this is also that the process is then open to any sort of retailer, any supplier, and that once you've kind of collected the data, because you're collecting effectively all the production data for that supplier, if other suppliers are then other retailers are then using that same supplier, then they can also harvest that data too. And so what you're kind of creating is sort of a cross-industry play, which anybody can then tap into as part of the process moving forward.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking. What are some of the key challenges that you're kind of looking to address? Because obviously there's an issue around data existing, I guess.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting because I think the challenges are not the challenges that people probably expected at the beginning. So looking at it from a technical problem perspective, well, actually, those problems aren't as complex as potentially sort of one we first thought, and two, actually sort of from an ability to manage them perspective, actually, are eminently manageable. So, what we actually have built through the pilot is a industry grade, scalable transparency solution. We can ingest as much data as there is out there from as many tiers as we like. We can layer in additional data. So if you want to put water certificates into there, if you want to kind of do carbon elements, we can layer all of that in there. We can then we have the AI to then interrogate that data to do the analysis, to extract the data, and then to present it. So, and I'm not saying that necessarily is easy, because I mean, particularly things like sort of ingestion of data, we have had to kind of play around with, we've been doing voice and text ingestion. So we've been working with farmers in Turkey, for example, to test those solutions out so we can get data in that way. We're doing machine readable components where we're effectively ingesting photographs and documents, and then sort of using AI to actually sort of interpret that data and ingest that. So I mean, it's not that sort of some of these pieces are actually sort of particularly technically simple, but there are solutions for all of them. So I would say sort of from a technical standpoint, all of the elements of that, and actually we've proven that with certified and non-certified products. The issue really is around some of the changes that we need to then make sort of as an industry. So the biggest piece here is actually sort of how do I then work with my suppliers? How do I sort of make this as simple as possible for them? How do I kind of pierce the veil backwards through the supply chain? Because I mean, supply chains are set up in order that you can kind of create competitive advantage at each of the various different stages. So the sharing of kind of production data, that kind of thing, is not normally done. It's not normally asked for. So there's a whole stakeholder discussion you have to have around why are we doing this, what data is required, how do we sort of kind of get that data sort of repeatably. Is there need for things like audit? Is there it's actually sort of that more stakeholder component, and also the process piece. Because what we also need to get better at, I think, as an industry is actually kind of forcing the issue. We're asking somewhat for this data, and we do need it as part of the process, but it's not built into the way that we do things. So at the moment, elements of sustainability in its broadest possible sense are in our buying panels, but not everything that we need. And so we actually do need to change our processes. We need to kind of build that supply chain transparency, everything from sort of forced labor, minimum wage, water, carbon. Those all need to kind of be brought in as part and parcel of what we do as a core process, because you can't really sort of do these as an adjunct later on. So it's actually some of those more process, people, stakeholder issues, which are probably the trickier. But again, what we're looking to try and do is from a technical standpoint, again, is to then make that as simple as possible. So you never get past the having to explain to people why you're doing this, what you're doing, and what you want. But actually sort of what you're then looking to do is to make the process of actually then providing it to you as simple and as repeatable as possible. And that's what we spend a lot of time on, is actually understanding those elements of the process, so that you can do it quickly, you can do it once, or you can change your process. So if I'm sort of working at the farm level, that what we're actually sort of saying is we need your data. So when you're sort of handing over your bales of cotton to the ginner, then and they're giving you sort of your invoice back, we would like you to just take a quick photograph and send it to this. And you do that every single time, so it becomes part of the process. So there are some process components that we do need to change as part of this as well. And it's those elements, it's that kind of knitting those pieces together, which is probably the most complex.
Yeah, so it's not the challenges, I guess, some of us would have thought when we were starting out that they would be. The project initially focused on cotton. Why was that?
Well, I mean, what we were looking for was a process, one that actually sort of would be as useful as possible to the retailers we were working with, and all of them had cotton as part of their mix. All of the end retailers, I exclude Laxtons from that, but and so therefore that kind of made sense, because we could actually sort of work on a product which they all sort of had as a core part of their portfolio, and so therefore it kind of applied to all. I think the second reason really we went for cotton is actually because of its complexity, which sounds like a weird thing to do, but because it's a multi-tiered process, because it actually is a farmed product, because actually sort of the sophistication of the supply chain, particularly as you're getting back down towards the farm, is a lot less than in other sort of kind of more industrialized components. If you're kind of looking at things like elements of wool, some of the cellulose, polyester. What we actually wanted is to actually understand sort of all of the complexities that potentially are then going to pop up. So how do I get a farming collective in India to ingest data for us? if I'm going down the polyester route, actually, I'm just going to work with a large corporate who produces polyester, and it's a simpler process-ish. But from a data perspective, we're actually going to systems of record and extracting data, not ingesting sort of through chat or through voice. So we want it to be as complex as possible. And I think the other reason also was then because it already had a certified and an uncertified route. So that way we could then also test those elements out. So,
and by certified and uncertified, we're talking organic.
We're talking GOT certificates, organic, those. So BCI certified. And actually, but even there, so the BCI certified piece, the difference between that and something like a GOT certificate is the GOT certificate actually goes with the fabric as it goes. BCI is more of a mass balance approach. So there's an input and an output. So it doesn't follow necessarily the product itself. So it's understanding sort of those types of issues and actually what you then need to do in order to be able to get the data to kind of flow effectively across them. So we wanted to make sure that as we were sort of doing the research piece, the pilot piece, which we completed at the end of last year, that we could actually sort of get into as many of the problems and the complexities as we possibly could as part of that process. And
that is a one particular. I mean, it's not what it, as we said, there's a few ways that could work, but how could those findings be applied to other fibers?
Well, I mean, so from a process perspective, they're pretty similar. So what we actually need to do as a process, I'm not saying that the supply chains are similar, but the process that we are going to do is very similar. So most of what we're doing is a kind of a rinse and repeat. What you're actually really sort of doing as far as the any move from one fiber to another is just really understanding what's the core of that supply chain. How does it work? What are the key steps and who are the key players? And so there's always that part you need to do because you need to actually understand sort of what that is. You also need to understand their level of sophistication. And all I mean by that is technical sophistication. So, do they have systems of record or don't they? And actually sort of how can you leverage that? You also want to kind of have a little look at the certification components. Are products certified or not? So are there already existing almost kind of pseudo traceability pieces which are associated with it? But beyond that, really what you're then doing is the same thing. We're asking suppliers to provide us with production data as part of what they do in their daily work. So we want to understand, when the batch came in, what was the invoice number? When the batch went out, what was the invoice number? What's the transformation event which has happened in between? And how has that happened? And then we're off to the next supplier. So it doesn't matter whether they're a polyester supplier, a wool supplier, a cotton supplier, it's the same core process.
No, exactly. It was really good that we initially worked with a UK textile manufacturer like Laxtons. Where did that get to?
I mean, the really interesting thing sort of about the Laxtons component of this is obviously they're very different. They don't have cotton as part of their mix, and they're in a different place within the process. So to a degree that they're not sort of in the retail position. They don't have that direct customer component. So they're in the side of the supplier sort of having to provide the data rather than necessarily sort of being sort of in the retail end. But having said that, what they were very keen to do is actually really sort of understand how they could get sort of better data into what it is that they do. So actually I can prove to you sort of where my wools come from, the nature of it, sort of the properties that are associated with that particular wool, and that that there is value then in sort of providing that to people I'm supplying. And and what we're sort of seeing is that's becoming more true, not just from a reporting perspective, but also because more and more people are looking at, okay, well actually I'd love to sort of see that woolly jumper I've just bought, where's it from? What's the nature of the product? How far has it been transported? How are the sheep being treated as part of that? That's starting to become more and more of value. So we were looking at sort of components from that side of things, and where we sort of started, because it was actually sort of a relatively easy place to start. I mean, the issue with the cotton component is that the suppliers we're talking to are in Turkey, They are in Bangladesh. They are, they're not local, so you can't go visit them. We were in COVID as well, so we definitely couldn't go visit them. So you can't sort of physically kind of get your hands on the process. So the opportunity to kind of have a look at it from a wool perspective in the UK, working with people like the British Wool Board, allowed us to sort of actually have that more hands-on side of things. And and we did go and talk to farmers, and we sort of have had conversations sort of with the Wool Board as well. And what we've sort of done from that sort of perspective is the same thing we did with cotton: map the process and understood sort of what the issues are which are associated with it. Now, what we haven't done yet is sort of kind of taking it to the next level, because of the economics of wool, and the value of the fleece, particularly sort of going into the process in the UK at the moment. Doing the traceability in the same way as we're doing for the retailers doesn't have the same level of value. So actually what we're looking at now is, well, actually, how do you use the same sort of techniques, but then to support people like the Wool Board to then actually kind of greater degree of transparency for the product through the supply chain from their perspective. Because obviously sort of the way that works, and the fact that they're an aggregator and that they're sort of kind of pulling together a variety of different farmers' products, there's a natural break in the process. So actually, how do you kind of undo that break? So that's progressed in a slightly different route. We're not really looking at it from a customer end. We're actually looking at it from a supply chain side of things. Now, that hasn't progressed as far as cotton has, but it's still an ongoing conversation.
Okay, brilliant. The pilot partners generally were large retailers, as they have sort of the most complex supply chains. But the aim is to create a system that can be used by businesses of all sizes and all parts of the supply chain.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that's important and how it would work?
Yeah, I mean, it is super important, because what we are sort of seeing is a great proliferation in all elements, that on the supply side and actually on the retail side of organizations that are looking to kind of take niche positions, create products, and do things in ways which are somewhat different to kind of the classic retailers. And they form a very large part of the industry, both from a volume perspective and actually also from a number of organizations. So, what we've always been sort of looking at is, how do you kind of create something, which is kind of why we've gone the platform route, so that, what we're not then creating is something where it's quite expensive to access. So the way the platform is set up is that, the costs for actually sort of being on it, and then the access that you gain effectively can then be run on an as a service basis. So, there isn't a massive amount of cost to get on board. And then what we're then doing is, depending on the volume throughput, you can then sort of, you effectively pay for what you get as part of that process. Now, the whole point of all of this is then, how do you get that cost down as low as possible? How do you get it to be as repeatable as possible? And that's where we're sort of kind of systemizing, but also sharing. So one of the things that we're starting to kind of look at the moment is, can we get a group of smaller suppliers together to run a pilot with them, now that we've done the bigger organizations, so that we can then start getting into some of the issues which are associated with that. So actually, are we talking single supplier? Are we talking lots of very, very small sort of volumes to a lot of different suppliers? And therefore, how does that play out, and how might it work? Also then getting into some of the components around the economics, and the economics has been an ongoing conversation. So who do you get to pay? Is this done at the retail end, and it's done on a per garment basis? Do you do what others in the industry have done, and actually sort of that there is a kind of a fee or admission to kind of go on the platform, and the suppliers pay that, and what we're trying to do is to make it so that the barriers to entry are as small as possible to everybody within that process. So how do you kind of get an equitable split across the play? Because I mean, there are also then issues around, if I'm an early adopter, am I paying all this money for the development? Well, actually, that's kind of where the UK government's come in, because they've paid for quite a lot of the development, and actually all of the partners have also paid for quite a lot of that development already. So you've overcome a lot of the capital components. It's now kind of, how do you get this into an economic and repeatable process?
Because that's it. Everybody, I think you wouldn't find many people, unless you're doing something really wrong, who wouldn't want this. But obviously, who pays for it is a totally different conversation.
And the nice thing about this is that because of the way it's set up, because a supplier is on and the data is there, what you don't have in most cases is an onboarding cost. So once and we're not there yet, but once you've kind of got a cool set of suppliers on there, the cost of somebody then joining the platform, if the suppliers are already there, is very small because they're already there. But then it's a question of how do you then equitably split across all of the people who are on board? Because if I'm an early adopter, then none of my suppliers are going to be there because I'm one of the first. If I'm coming on later, then a lot of my suppliers are going to be on there. So my onboarding costs are going to be less. But actually, should the person who was first pay for me? Yeah. And actually, how do you kind of get that? So there are still some conversations to be had around that economics piece and the cross-subsidization components, and actually sort of how do you make sure it is accessible to smaller players and not prohibitive in costs. I mean, the technology side of things actually aren't that expensive. And funnily enough, you sort of think there's lots of data in this, and there is lots of data in this, but in the grand scheme of things, there's not lots of data in this in comparison to other industries that we work in. So, the volume of throughput and the technical back end that's required to manage it's actually relatively containable. So those costs aren't huge. So, I mean, I think the economics of this are actually sort of playing quite nicely in our favor. We still need to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's as to what would a cross-industry play look like in order to be able to deliver this.
Would you typically find then that it would be driven at retail level, retailers are coming on board and they're then inputting their supply chain? I guess the nature from the big retailers is going to be that way because the push is there. But for some of our UK textile companies, for example, might want to come on without the retail end, but as a way of saying, look, here's this is a kind of we're proactively doing that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and actually we've already had some of those conversations as well. So slightly left field as we were kind of going through the process, but we had the Bangladeshi High Commission give us a call and say, well, actually, we're presenting to the Bangladesh fashion industry, and they are really, really interested in being part of this process because what they want to be able to prove is the efficacy of what they're doing. And they want, therefore, to be part of the transparency process. And can they get access? And so to your point, I think it's a hugely valid point where, what we're getting is suppliers saying, well, actually, we want to be part of this. So how can we become part of this? Because it's not then just about who is currently in your supply chain, but it's, that potentially is a way for others to then say, well, actually, you may not use us right now, but actually we're really good. And actually we can prove we're really good and we'd like to be part of the process. So we want to be on here because it's not just about who you're buying from today, but it's also who you might want to buy from tomorrow. So those pieces also need to play into that process as well. So we've had some of those conversations. Actually, it's not massively complicated to do it because the process is the same. Because that's the nice thing about this piece. The process is the same, irrespective of whether I'm a supplier or whether I'm a retailer. The process is also the same, almost kind of irrespective of material. And then actually, once you start putting more and more materials on, if I blend materials, actually that's relatively simple as well because it's just two data streams blending. So we can kind of manage all of those things because of the way the system is being built.
I think that sort of ties into how could a project like this benefit the UK supply chain, in particular UK textile companies, as it progresses?
Yeah, I mean, and I think so. Really, what we're sort of looking to do is to kind of make this almost assuming that people want to kind of buy into the process, to kind of make this a UK standard because we believe, and I think we've proven through the pilot components of what we're now doing and starting to roll it out, that we can do this effectively at scale and repeatably. And that what we could then have as an industry is that traceability and being able to prove that traceability and sort of show that the steps that we're sort of being able to take in order to be able to kind of drive the sustainability components. And actually not just sustainability. I mean, one of the other things around supply chain transparency is what it also gives you is the ability to do better supply chain management. So, if we know there are outages in certain parts of the world of, shipping issues, so container issues, which we've been having lots of, and they're impacting a particular region, well, actually, this tool will then be able to tell you, who have you got in region, because we geo-position everybody, and actually how that might impact your supply chain. So this isn't just about sustainability. This is also about sort of driving better supply chain balancing and optimization of that. But I mean, the whole idea of this really was to sort of kind of give the UK industry a leg up and sort of say, look, how do we prove real time? Because this is the other thing. This is not, we're getting a piece of data and then we'll go get it again 2 years later. This is real time. We can prove real time that we know what's in our supply chain, who our suppliers are, and then we can then start layering in water data, labor data, wage data, diversity data, carbon data on top of those pieces to actually sort of have a real view of what it is that's going on. And that then plays into things like sort of, the Higg index. You could layer those elements on top as well. So really what we can then start to show the world is actually we've got a truly repeatable, sustainable, transparent supply chain, and that we're sort of taking a lead as far as that's concerned.
One of the things, I mean, obviously we've been talking about this project for quite a couple of years at least. What impact has the pandemic had on this? Because it's sort of, it's an international situation and things are not, like we couldn't travel, for example, to go and get some of that data.
I don't think it's actually had much of an impact at all. If in fact, probably if it had any impact, it's probably positive, because, we're asking some quite interesting and maybe difficult questions of people as part of the process. Mm-hmm. But, because of the pandemic, actually people have a little bit more time on their hands that they may not sort of been would have done otherwise, because they've been out and doing things. And so actually, what we've found is that people have been actually quite responsive to the process. I mean, there have been issues around, obviously sort of, people have been hit somewhat quite hard, depending on sort of which sectors they're in, from an economic standpoint, and there's a capacity discussion which is associated with that. And we have had to play a little bit to that, but it hasn't really sort of massively impacted us negatively from that standpoint. What we've sort of found is that the supply chain organizations we've talked to and have all understood why we're doing this. They all understand the need for doing this, and actually a lot of them want to do more. And so, really sort of the way I'm sort of seeing this is, the tools and the approaches that we're sort of looking at and others are sort of taking within the industry, the key thing is actually sort of how do you unlock that capacity for change? Because there is that capacity there. And the problem has always been around, the technologies and the processes that we have in order to unlock it. And I think, the sorts of things that we're now starting to build and starting to see are going, and so you can actually legitimately say to suppliers, look, we are actually interested. These are the things we'd like to do. And actually they're all ready for us. And they're sort of saying, well, actually, we've been wanting to do that for a while as well. It's just not been something that we've been easily been able to do. Exactly. If you can make it easy for us, we're all in.
That's it. I think there's a lot of people wanting, people are being asked about things. People know that some of this needs to happen, but
and customers are asking for it, and they can sort of, this is no longer something where you look at it and go, it's a price I need to pay. It's actually, it's a positive message. It's, we all know we need to stand together to actually really kind of drive sustainability in its broadest possible sense for the planet, for the betterment of, the planet itself, of the species, biodiversity, and ourselves. And actually sort of the market's moving in that direction as well. And, and we're sort of seeing, economics kind of play towards players who actually are willing to embrace the sustainability message and make it kind of a core part of what they do. So you've kind of got past that, why am I doing this? Everybody knows why they're doing this. Everybody can see some value in doing this. So it's a much easier discussion than it was even a couple of years ago. And it's really how do you embrace it and accelerate it as much as possible.
Definitely. What do you see as the next steps then? I mean, I guess how quickly could we see this roll out in a significant way? How quickly could?
So we're already sort of defining exactly sort of what the next steps are with the partner organizations we work with in the first place. So, how do we sort of take our proof of concept and rapidly take it to scale? And so those are the conversations which are going on now, with a view that actually, what we will be showing to people, because we can already show people we can do this technically, it's then around sort of turning that into a commercial proposition and kind of getting it into the market relatively quickly. Now, all of that is now being done. And the timing on this is purely based around sort of how quickly can we actually sort of get the process moving from a pure process of getting activity to happen side of things. But what we're aiming at is that, so within this quarter, that we will be able to kind of show exactly what the tool can do at scale with a number of suppliers and doing it real time. So that's the aim. We're talking to a lot of different organizations around sort of getting them to get engaged. We're also looking to, as I mentioned before, pull together a consortium of smaller organizations to then treat them as kind of a whole that we can then kind of engage with as well from that side of things. But the scaling out process is purely down to how quickly from sort of a commercial and contracting side of things that we can move, because from a technological and a process perspective, we're pretty much already there. So we're looking to kind of really accelerate it this year, to have significant volumes in the platform this year, and then to be moving beyond cotton very quickly and into other products. So we're already having those conversations now, and sort of kind of expand that out. So what I would hope to be able to sort of say, if you ask me this question in a year's time, is we've already got a significant portion of the UK suppliers or supply chain on the platform as it stands, and we will move as quickly as our partners are happy to move.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Keric. It's been really interesting, and thank you for your time. UKFT will be sharing much more details as this progresses. So yeah, it's been a really good project, and we're really pleased to work with you. And thank you.
It's been a pleasure.